Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. It happened on my birthday. Not with a fight, not with an argument, but with a single sentence that shattered the last piece of what I thought we had left. The candles were still burning on the cake. Friends had just left, and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. She stood across from me, arms crossed, eyes cold, and when I leaned in to kiss her cheek, she pulled back. Then she said it, clear enough to echo in my head even now. My wish. To never touch you again. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. I froze, staring at her as if she had just announced the weather. No yelling, no sarcasm, no laughter. She meant it. And in that moment, everything inside me shifted. I didn't shout. I didn't demand an explanation. I didn't ask how long she had felt that way. I simply stood there, looking at the woman I had once built my world around, and realized she was already gone. That night, I didn't try to argue or force a conversation. I blew out the candles alone, scraped the leftover cake into the trash, and went to bed in silence. She turned her back to me, phone glowing in her hand, and I stared at the ceiling, the echo of her words looping in my head. Not as pain anymore, but as clarity. The next morning, something in me broke free. I woke early, showered, dressed, and left the house before she even stirred. I didn't make coffee for her. I didn't check if her car had gas. I didn't send the usual morning text to remind her of her meetings. I was done being the man who carried every piece of her life while she dismissed mine. At work, my phone buzzed with her message. Where did you go? I stared at it, let the screen go dark, and put it back in my pocket. By noon, she sent another. Are you okay? I replied with one word. Fine. And that was it. When I came home that evening, she was waiting at the kitchen table, arms crossed again, trying to look unfazed. She asked why I hadn't said goodbye, why I hadn't checked in during the day. I rinsed my glass, met her eyes once, and said calmly, because you made your wish. Then I walked upstairs, leaving her in the silence she had created. For the first time, she looked unsure. And for me, it was the first time in years that I felt untouchable. The days after my birthday felt different. Not because she changed anything, but because I did. I stopped orbiting around her. I stopped waiting for her approval, her attention, her touch. She had made her wish clear, and I decided to grant it. On Monday morning, I left early again. Normally, I would have brewed her coffee, packed her lunch, and reminded her of her schedule. Instead, I slipped out of the house before dawn, the silence of my absence filling every room. By the time she woke up, I was already at the gym. My phone lit up with her messages, first casual, then questioning, then sharp. I ignored the first two and answered the third with one word. Busy. When I returned home that evening, she was in the kitchen, arms folded, trying to hold on to the composure that had always given her power. She asked where I'd been all day, why I hadn't checked in, why I hadn't answered her calls. I placed my keys on the counter, looked at her once, and said, "You told me you didn't want me near you." I listened. Then I walked past her. Her reaction was small but telling. The way her lips parted, the way her eyes darted down, like she wasn't sure if I was serious. For the first time, I saw her crack. By Wednesday, she began to notice the other changes. The fridge was empty because I no longer stocked it. The laundry piled up because I stopped folding it. The small chores that had kept the house running, my hands had always done them. Now they went undone. She tried to cover the gap, but she wasn't used to carrying the weight. She left work late, came home tired, and still had to face a house that no longer moved smoothly without me. That night, she sat at the edge of the bed, her voice softer than usual, asking if I was upset. I didn't answer. I opened my book, turned the page, and let the silence answer for me. She shifted uncomfortably, waiting for me to break the quiet, but I didn't. She turned away eventually, but I knew she wasn't sleeping. Her breathing was too uneven, her body too tense. By the weekend, she had stopped talking about her wish. She didn't mention it again, didn't dare. But I could see her watching me differently now. The same man she had once rejected so easily had become someone she no longer understood. And in that confusion, the power she had over me began to disappear. By the third week after my birthday, the silence between us had turned into something she could no longer ignore. At first, she tried to act as if nothing had changed, carrying herself with the same indifference she had shown me for months. But the truth was written in the small cracks. She lingered longer in the kitchen when I came home, as if waiting for me to notice her. She hovered near the doorway when I sat in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but glancing at me every few seconds. I didn't react. I let her presence dissolve into the background noise she had once made me feel like. One evening, I came home later than usual. I had stopped rushing back to her. The gym, late dinners with coworkers, even just driving aimlessly with the windows down felt more alive than returning to a house that had become a cage. When I walked in, she was already seated at the dining table, a meal set for two. Candles flickered, music hummed low. It was staged like a memory of what we used to have. I sat, ate quietly, thanked her once, and went upstairs. Behind me, I heard the clink of her fork hitting the plate, followed by silence. The next morning, she tried a new tactic. She brewed coffee the way I liked it, poured it into my favorite mug, and set it in front of me. I took my bag, my keys, and walked out the door without touching the cup. Through the glass, I saw her standing there, staring at the steam curling upward from a drink that would never be consumed. Her efforts grew less subtle as the days passed. She began dressing up before I came home, slipping into clothes she hadn't worn in years, spraying perfume that once made me pause. But I didn't pause anymore. I walked past her like she was a stranger, and I could feel the panic growing in her eyes, the realization that what she had taken for granted was slipping beyond her reach. That Friday night, I caught her standing in the hallway, staring at me as I prepared to head upstairs. She asked if we could talk. Her tone wasn't commanding anymore. It was fragile, unsteady. I looked at her, silent, then continued walking. She stayed frozen there, caught between pride and desperation, with nothing but the echo of my footsteps answering her. The wish she had made on my birthday had come true. She said she never wanted my touch again. So I erased it. Every gesture, every effort, every piece of myself I had once offered freely. And now, she was learning what it felt like to live in the emptiness she had wished for. By the fourth week, her mask of indifference had slipped entirely. She no longer moved through the house with the same confidence, no longer spoke with the sharp edge that once cut me down so easily. Instead, she hovered, cautious, as though every word might push me further away. But she still didn't realize I was already gone. One night, I came home later than usual. The lights in the living room were dimmed, the table set neatly, candles flickering again. She was sitting there, waiting, her hands folded tightly in front of her. She asked if I wanted to eat together, her voice quiet, stripped of the arrogance she used to wear like armor. I sat down, ate what she had prepared, and when I was done, I stood, thanked her once, and left her sitting alone at the table. I didn't stay for conversation, didn't offer her a chance to reclaim ground. I could hear the clink of her fork hitting the plate after I walked away, a sound that carried more defeat than any argument ever had. The next morning, she tried again. She placed her hand lightly on my arm as I passed her in the kitchen. The gesture was hesitant, almost pleading. I didn't flinch. I didn't react at all. I picked up my bag, walked out the door, and left her standing there with her hand suspended in the air. Her behavior shifted more each day. She stopped going out with her friends. She stopped posting pictures online. Instead, she lingered at home, waiting for me, trying to catch even the smallest piece of my attention. I gave her nothing. The silence between us became its own presence, filling every corner of the house, pressing against her until she could hardly breathe. One evening, I found her in the living room, staring at old photographs spread across the coffee table. Our wedding, vacations, moments she thought could still anchor me to her. She looked up when I entered, her eyes shining, her lips trembling as she asked if I remembered how happy we used to be. I glanced at the photos, nodded once, and walked upstairs without a word. The sound of her closing the album echoed behind me, hollow and final. She had made her wish on my birthday, and I had given it to her. She said she never wanted my touch again, and now she lived in the void that came with those words. The emptiness she once handed to me was now hers to carry, and I wasn't planning to take it back. By the fifth week, she was unraveling. The sharpness that once cut through her voice had dulled into hesitation. She moved around me like someone afraid of breaking glass, careful, uncertain, testing whether I would respond. But the truth was simple. I had already stopped listening. One morning, I came downstairs to find breakfast waiting on the table. Eggs, toast, coffee, the kind of meal I hadn't seen from her in years. She stood by the counter, waiting for me to notice. I sat down, ate quietly, thanked her once, and left without touching the coffee. When the door closed behind me, I could imagine her standing there, staring at the untouched cup, realizing that small gestures no longer carried weight. Later that week, she tried a different approach. She texted me in the middle of the day, not with casual reminders, but with paragraphs, memories, confessions, even apologies threaded between her words. She wrote about our first road trip, about the night we stayed up talking until sunrise, about how she had once felt safe in my arms. I read them all, and then I locked my phone and put it back in my pocket. Silence was my reply. That Friday, I came home late to find her waiting in the hallway. She asked where I had been, her voice trembling beneath a mask of calm. I looked at her, steady and cold, and said, "Out." That was it. She wanted details, wanted explanations, but I left her with the same silence she had once given me. At night, she no longer turned away from me in bed. Instead, she faced me, eyes open in the dark, her hand inching closer as though she might reach for me. I didn't move. I let her linger in that hesitation until she rolled over, frustrated, caught between pride and desperation. The house itself reflected the shift. The chores she never noticed before now weighed heavily on her. The empty fridge, the unwashed laundry, the faucet still leaking in the bathroom. Things I had once handled without thought now stood as reminders of what she had lost. She moved through the rooms slower, quieter, burdened not just by the tasks but by the absence of the man who used to carry them. She had once told me, with cold certainty, that she wished to never touch me again. But now she hovered near me, reaching without reaching, waiting without asking, desperate for the closeness she had thrown away. And every day that passed, she learned the same lesson over and over. Wishes come true, but not always the way you imagine. By the 6th week, her silence was no longer a choice. It was a weight pressing down on her, one she could neither escape nor control. She had spent so long turning away from me at night, shrugging me off in the mornings, that she thought rejection was power. But now she was beginning to understand what it felt like when rejection echoed back louder than she could bear. I started noticing her shadow more than her words. She followed me into the kitchen, lingered in the doorway when I read in the living room, even stood at the window when I pulled into the driveway, as if rehearsing a welcome she never gave. I passed by her each time, calm, detached, letting the distance speak for me. One evening, I returned from the gym to find her sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, her eyes swollen like she'd been crying. She asked if we could talk, her voice brittle, almost breaking. I walked past her, placed my bag upstairs, and came back down only to pour myself water. She waited, hoping I'd say something, but I didn't. She took a shaky sip, set her glass down, and whispered that she missed me. I rinsed my cup, set it on the counter, and left the room. Her words dissolved into the silence she once loved to use against me. That night, she didn't turn away in bed. Instead, she lay close, her hand brushing mine, hesitant, trembling. For years, she had pulled away from my touch. Now she was searching for it. I stayed still. She pulled back after a moment, rolling over, her shoulders stiff. The silence between us stretched long into the dark, heavy enough to smother her breathing. At work, I noticed how differently people looked at me. Colleagues commented on my focus, the energy I carried into meetings. Even casual strangers at the gym noticed the discipline in me. It wasn't about attention. It was about the clarity that came when I stopped pouring myself into someone who treated me like an afterthought. The life she had drained out of me was coming back, piece by piece, and none of it belonged to her anymore. When I came home that Friday, the house smelled of a meal she had cooked, the table set again with candles and music. She smiled nervously, waiting for me to join her. I sat, ate quietly, thanked her once, and went upstairs. Alone, she stayed at the table, staring at her untouched plate, the flicker of candlelight reflecting the emptiness she now carried. Her birthday wish had been granted. She said she never wanted my touch again. And now, she was finally living inside the world she had created. By the 7th week, the silence had reshaped our home. She no longer carried herself with the arrogance that once filled every corner of the house. Instead, she drifted through the rooms cautiously, as though every step might expose the truth she had buried for too long. I noticed the change in her routines. The late nights out with friends stopped. The constant glow of her phone dimmed. Even her social media presence disappeared, as if she couldn't stand to pretend anymore. Instead, she stayed home, waiting, hoping for me to acknowledge her again. But I had no intention of feeding the emptiness she created. One night, I came home later than usual, and she was waiting in the living room with photo albums spread across the table. Old pictures, our wedding, vacations, birthdays. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading as she asked if I remembered how happy we used to be. I glanced at the photos, nodded once, and walked upstairs. She stayed behind, staring at those frozen smiles, realizing they belonged to a past she could never reach again. Her desperation grew sharper after that. She hovered near me in the mornings, asking small questions, offering coffee, even trying to plan dinners. Each time, my responses were short, detached, leaving her stranded in silence. She wanted my attention, my effort, my warmth. But I had already pulled them back, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for her to take. At night, she stopped pretending to sleep. I could feel her eyes on me in the dark, searching for something that wasn't there. Once, she whispered that she didn't mean what she said on my birthday, that she was angry, careless. The words trembled out of her like a confession. I turned away, closed my eyes, and let the silence answer for me. By then, even her friends had started to notice. I overheard her on the phone, her voice shaky, telling someone that I wasn't the same anymore, that I was slipping away. She tried to make it sound like I was punishing her, but the truth cracked through her tone. She wasn't describing me. She was confessing her fear. She was no longer in control. Meanwhile, my life outside the house thrived. My focus at work sharpened, my body grew stronger at the gym, and people noticed. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by what I gave her. I was defined by what I kept for myself. She had wished never to touch me again, and now she lived in a reality where her hands reached for me and found nothing but air. By the 8th week, the silence between us had grown into something unbreakable. She no longer argued, no longer snapped, no longer tried to remind me of who she used to be. Instead, she watched me constantly, every move I made, every hour I stayed away, as if studying a stranger who now lived in her house. Her efforts became desperate in ways I hadn't expected. She began cooking full dinners again, setting the table with candles, music humming low in the background. She waited for me like we were about to have a date. I sat, ate quietly, thanked her once, and left the table. She stayed behind, staring at her plate, her hands shaking slightly as she picked at food she no longer wanted. On another evening, she tried a softer approach. She slipped into bed earlier than usual, curled toward my side, her body pressing close in a way it hadn't for months. I didn't move. I didn't push her away, but I didn't give in either. I lay still, breathing evenly. And after a while, she shifted back to her side, her breathing unsteady, the silence heavier than her touch. I could feel her unraveling day by day. The phone that used to consume her sat untouched. The friends she used to meet had stopped calling. Even her family's messages went unanswered. She had locked herself in a house filled with echoes, hoping that if she stayed close enough, I might break first. But I didn't. One night, she finally spoke what had been building in her eyes for weeks. She sat at the edge of the bed and whispered that she regretted what she had said on my birthday, that she hadn't meant it, that she was angry, careless, lost. Her voice cracked, her words stumbled over themselves, but I stayed silent. I turned away, letting the darkness swallow her apology. Outside the house, my life thrived more than ever. I carried myself with a strength I hadn't felt in years. Colleagues noticed, strangers noticed. The absence of her rejection had sharpened me, stripped away the weight I once carried. I had rebuilt myself quietly, piece by piece, while she was left to crumble under the silence she had chosen. By the end of that week, she looked at me differently, not with anger, not with pride, but with fear. Fear of losing what she thought would always be there, waiting, forgiving, chasing. She finally realized the truth. I was no longer the man who reached for her. She had wished for distance. And now, distance was all she had left. By the 9th week, the silence had consumed her completely. The woman who once dismissed me so easily now hovered in every room, restless, anxious, waiting for me to say something, anything, that might tether me back to her. But I didn't. I had already stepped out of her orbit, and she was only now realizing how cold it felt without my gravity pulling her in. One evening, I returned home to find her standing in the kitchen, her hands gripping the counter, her eyes swollen from crying. She asked if I still loved her, her voice breaking on the words. I looked at her, calm, unshaken, and said nothing. I poured myself a glass of water, drank, and walked upstairs. Her quiet sobs followed me down the hallway, muffled by the same silence she had once forced me to endure. Her attempts became frantic. She started sending me long texts late at night, spilling apologies she never gave before, confessing regrets she had once been too proud to admit. I read them, then set the phone down. No reply. The silence between us was louder than any words I could have sent. At night, she tried to close the distance. She faced me in bed, her hand brushing my arm, her breathing shallow as if she feared rejection. But there was nothing left to reject. I didn't move, didn't acknowledge her presence. She pulled back slowly, her body curling in on itself, her shoulders trembling in the dark. Outside the house, my life only grew stronger. I was sharper at work, more confident in every interaction, alive in a way I hadn't been in years. People noticed. They saw the steadiness, the calm strength I carried. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't performance. It was clarity, the kind that comes when you stop pouring yourself into someone who only drains you. By then, she no longer tried to hide her desperation. She waited for me by the door when I came home, asked questions she already knew I wouldn't answer, hovered close enough to reach, but never brave enough to touch. The irony was sharp. The woman who had once said she wished to never touch me again was now the one aching for even the smallest connection. But I had nothing left to give. She thought silence was control. She thought rejection was strength. But in the end, she was the one crushed under the weight of her own wish. And I was the one who walked through it untouched. The 10th week ended with a silence so sharp it felt like the walls themselves had absorbed it. The house no longer carried the rhythm of conversation, no laughter, no warmth. Only the weight of her regret, hanging heavy in every room. She barely left anymore. Her phone sat untouched, her friends absent, her family distant. The same independence she once flaunted had collapsed into isolation. On a Sunday morning, I began packing. Not loudly, not with anger, not with a scene. Just methodically, quietly, as though I were folding away the last remnants of a life that no longer belonged to me. Clothes, documents, a few personal things, nothing more. I didn't need much. Freedom doesn't weigh heavy. She stood in the doorway, frozen, her voice trembling as she asked what I was doing. I didn't answer. I zipped the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked past her. She followed me down the stairs, her words spilling faster now. Apologies, promises, desperate bargains. She said she didn't mean it, that her wish had been a mistake, that she wanted me back. At the bottom of the stairs, I set my keys on the counter. For the first time in weeks, I looked at her fully. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking, her body trembling with the weight of her own words. She had built her pride on rejection, and now she was drowning in it. Calmly, I said, "You told me you wished to never touch me again. You got your wish. And now, I have mine." She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. Just silence. And in that silence, I turned, walked out the door, and closed it behind me. The air outside was cool, the sky wide open. For the first time in years, I felt light. No anger, no sorrow, no need for revenge. Just release. Behind me, the house stood still, filled with echoes that no longer had anything to do with me. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. She had wished me away, and I granted her exactly that. As I drove off, the road stretched long and clear before me. The life I once gave her was gone. The silence I carried had become my strength. And the wish she made so carelessly on my birthday had become the one truth she could never escape. She wished for distance. She wished for emptiness. She wished for the absence of my touch. And I gave her all of it. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.